And now it's time for the sponsor perspective portion of our program. Before we get going, a quick clarification. While I'm conducting this interview and the questions are mine, the content of this portion shouldn't be considered editorial. With that, I'd really like to welcome my friend Chip Davis, President and CEO of the Healthcare Distribution Alliance. Great backdrop there, Chip. I like that. You know, it's good. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying today's program, and thank you for supporting it. But let me ask you the same question I've asked a number of people, because there are different polls in this. There's distribution of drugs and therapies we've had line. We have new drugs and therapies that are potentially coming online to address this. How is that distribution network doing in terms of managing those stress points?
Yeah, Steve, first of all, thanks for the question, and more importantly to you and the Hill for running this event today, obviously for all the perspective that you're getting. Very timely discussion given where we are in the midst of this pandemic. In terms of sort of assessing where we have been, and I want to be clear when I say that, I'm not talking about some sort of after-action review here, because as you and other experts have noted on this call, we're right in the midst of it. Look at the numbers, as you said, over the last couple of days. But actually earlier this week, the HDA Foundation issued a report on how the pharmaceutical supply chain responded within the first 90 days. And to sum that up, I will tell you that the pharmaceutical supply chain was stretched and it bent, but it did not break. And I think you alluded to earlier the fact that pharmacy shelves, by and large, remained filled during the early days of COVID-19. Compare that, by way of example, to some other supply chains, whether it was in the food stores, the paper products aisle being empty. Sometimes people were put on processes where they could only go to the food store based upon the first name of the first letter of their last name. So by and large, the pharmaceutical supply chain has been very, very resilient, and I think that's a credit to everybody that's involved in it, from the frontline manufacturers, certainly to the frontline providers and the healthcare heroes there, both in the physician, provider, and pharmacy communities. But it also had a lot to do with our members, who really are, if you look at the global supply chain as sort of a wheel, we're the spoke of the wheel. We connect 1,300 manufacturers, our members at HDA, to over 180,000 providers. And I think if you look at our role in ensuring that resiliency, it comes down to three things that I would submit. The first being the level of partnership that we have, both with front-end manufacturers and frontline providers. Secondarily, the logistical expertise that you've heard about through some of the speakers today that distributors possess, really as the skeleton of the supply chain for pharmaceuticals. There is so much data and so much expertise that they apply on a regular basis to move millions and millions of prescriptions every single day to the healthcare system. And lastly, I would say it is the experiences, the prior experiences. Our members have been there every step of the way during things like natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, other climate-related events, that as COVID hit early on, as you remember, there were hot spots, and it allowed our members to respond to those areas of the country that were seeing surges like New York, New Jersey, and certain areas of the West Coast, and actually be able to move product from areas that weren't experiencing the surge to those areas that were, in an effort to ensure that everybody had access to the medicine they need.
Chip, in anticipation of this program today and my conversation with you, I sort of tried to delve into some of your members, how this thing works, because you sometimes lose some of the magic when you talk about logistics and supply chains and plays over. But it's extraordinary when you look at the amount of material that your members move under conditions of controlled temperatures, sometimes very, when we see vaccines come on, cold storage distribution, which is complex, expiration dates, prescriptions, et cetera, in kind of that broad array. So it's not just a kind of mass bulky move. There's a high level of precision in it. And I guess my question is, when something like this happens, does the economics work out? Do you have the resources you need? Are the partnerships with state and federal governments what they need to be to keep that healthy and strong and, complexly robust?
Yeah, Steve, so I would respond to your question really in two ways, is that if you look at what our members have done, I would summarize it over the past several months as being incredibly adaptable to the moving pieces in dealing with the pandemic, and then ensuring a level of robust communications within the context of a public-private partnership. I think the adaptation is consistent with what I just alluded to in making sure that as hotspots came on the radar, many of our members were the first ones to identify based upon the data they have, and they actually gave heads up to both the federal government, who we as an association and our members were in contact with every single day, multiple times a day, as you might might imagine, places like FEMA, CDC, HHS, and FDA, as well as the state governments for obvious reasons. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure as we move forward was that we were actually sort of memorializing and putting into regular practice a level of communication that I think led to the fact that as we begin to look towards vaccine distribution, that the federal government has identified utilizing the expertise that distributors bring to the table on a daily basis to ensure that as the vaccines come online, that the distribution industry is going to be there to play a significant role in getting those vaccines to the patients who need it.
When it comes to adapting, and from the experience we've seen so far, but looking ahead, what are some of those things that your members are preparing to do when it comes to the potential vaccines we might have?
So I think it's several. As you might imagine, they're in regular communication with the companies, many of whom you've heard about today, who are in the development phase right now, and making sure that they understand all the requirements that, as you just alluded to as well, some of them obviously have traditional cold chain or even ultra cold chain requirements. And so it's important for distributors to be aware of that, not once the vaccine's approved, but as the vaccines are in development. So staying in close contact on the front end with the manufacturing and development community. I think on the back end as well is making sure that talking to the states, given the responsibility that they have, and as you know, all the states are in the process of submitting their vaccine plans to the federal government by November 1st. So I think we're seeing trend lines there, both in terms of consistencies that the states are saying in terms of ensuring their needs are met, and also identifying some potential outlier issues that may need to be addressed. It's that constant importance of making sure that there's a public-private communication on a regular basis. We've actually put out a series of principles for vaccine distribution that highlight the importance of the public-private sector partnership, but also, to your underlying question, ensuring that there is as much robust and strategic communication between the federal government and state governments as we come closer to vaccines being approved.
Chip, we have a question for you from our audience, but I'm going to sneak in one more, which is,
Sure.
One of the questions I've been asking people for really the last 6 months is, what can we do today that prepares us well for the next emergency? I know we've got waves of COVID still coming, and that's our current obsession, but what are we doing now to kind of, build infrastructure so that we're not caught so off guard the next time? And I know that you talk to your members about this, about what we can do to better prepare for the next public health emergency. What would be some of the things on your list?
So there's sort of two things, Steve, to that point that jump to mind to me. Is one, as we move forward with an eye back towards the March, April timeframe, the coordination by the day and by the week got better within the federal government, but I think it's going to be really important to take away from this. And I think Secretary Sebelius mentioned this at the beginning of the program, the sort of, when we get to that point, hopefully sometime sooner rather than later, when we start doing the after-action analysis, I think the coordinated, centralized aspect of command will be really, really important as a key takeaway from this. And I think we've gotten there, but as everybody was coming to terms with so much uncertainty in the early part of this, that was an area with the benefit of hindsight that I think that could be improved upon. And I think the other aspect is just recognizing that in order to do this, to maximize the value of ensuring access to the treatments, the therapeutics, and the vaccines, it's going to be to leverage the expertise that already exists within the healthcare supply chain, whether it be the distributors and our expertise that we have, or the manufacturers, is to be really, really cautious about thinking about any alternative distribution channels that would require a significant amount of upfront investing and time frame that, quite frankly, we will not have the time for if we actually get to a place where we're dealing with other natural disasters or pandemics in the future.
Thank you for that. Well, Chip, I have a question from the audience, which I think is a great question. I'm going to pose it to you. So let's hear from Brad. Brad?
Hi, I'm Brad Trom, owner of Brad Trom Pharmacy Consulting, located in Brentwood, Tennessee. I'd like you to discuss the detailed logistics of the COVID-19 vaccine distribution and where the vaccine might be administered for the general public, whether it's in clinics or pharmacies or mass vaccination events. Thank you very much.
Great question. Scott Gottlieb got into this a little bit, but it's a great question. So how do you see this rolling out? Because your members are going to be doing this.
Very, very true, and thank you for the question. I think there's a couple of aspects of this right out of the gate that are going to be important. First is, obviously, as the first vaccine or the first and second waves of the vaccine get approved, we're going to be talking about millions of doses for hundreds of millions and ultimately billions of people across the planet. So what's going to be really, really important is making sure that we have direction from the government. And again, this goes back to sort of the importance of that regular daily communication in the public-private partnership of understanding what the expectations will be, the direction of both federal and state governments as to where those doses are to be delivered and distributed, understanding the sensitive populations, the elderly, the vulnerable, those with pre-existing conditions. Obviously, we want to make sure that frontline healthcare providers are taken care of, and we anticipate that there will be a significant amount of public health facilities utilized as vaccines come on board to ensure not just the effective distribution, but ultimately, as we like to say, the goal for us is to turn vaccines into vaccinations. And that's what our members are very much focused on. And I think engaging with the public health institutions and entities, both at the federal level, the state, and the local level, particularly as we see areas that will probably be focused on with a higher degree based upon the spread rate, is something that we'll be very, very focused on as we continue to move forward, working with both the manufacturers and the government.
Well, Chip Davis, President and CEO of Healthcare Distribution Alliance, this was an important set of discussions today. I'm very grateful to HDA and to you for supporting the program, but also for such a smart conversation. So thank you so much.
Good to be with you, Steve, as always. Thank you.